a password that was attached to the meeting that was not intentional. So as soon as I got the first email, I removed it, but still had a dozen or so student sort of writing me. So hopefully everyone was able to make it. Also kind of let everyone know that the lecture is being recorded, will be made available. It doesn't take super long for things to be processed through Zoom, but I would imagine a few hours after the lecture. But I wanted to give everyone a heads up because, yeah, the anything that's being said in the class here, it's a little bit like a sort of a large size class, not a seminar. So you'll have that, you're being recorded. Any sort of sort of private or things that you wouldn't want sort of be shared sort of more publicly, then of course there's lots of venues to do that, including email or office hours or sticking behind after class for us to chat. So without further ado, we're going to get started. The goal of today is to lay out what we're up to this semester so that you have a sense of sort of what the expectations are for the course, but even more so than that, that you have a good idea of what the content we're going to be dealing with. It's still a time in a semester where some students are sort of shopping around and seeing if a course is the right fit for them. And so it feels like it's important for that first class to just sort of, present as accurate a picture as possible about what to expect. And then you get to make a decision whether or not this is how you want to invest your first 6 weeks of the summer session. So I'm going to start with a discussion of mental health. It's been a really big topic. It's been topic for years, but truthfully, we've seen a really sort of increased attention to mental health issues over the course of progressively over the course of the last 15 years. But really, like an explosion of the discussion in public forums, in the news, in the way in which individuals, including students, make sense of their experiences using sort of mental health language since the pandemic of 2020. And so what I have here on the graph is an infographic from StatsCan that talks about, that really focuses here on sort of youth mental health. So sort of talking about people in a high school environment. And it talks about how 43% of girls and 22% of boys report feeling sad or hopeless almost every day for 2 weeks or more in a row. It also talks about 38% of girls and 24% of boys often wish they were someone else. And then 34% of girls and 25% of boys often feel lonely. And then, it has sort of a broad definition here of the concern, which is sort of this persistent negative thoughts and feelings, is what's being tracked by StatsCan, and then they talk about the different mitigating factors, and so factors that come in and have an impact on these levels, and provide some support, and provide some connections, provide some bonding, relationships with family and peers and in school, and not just that, but in different communities. Those can be hobby communities, it can be sports teams that people participate in, different extracurricular activities that students in high school may have been involved in. The more somebody is tied or has ties, meaningful social ties that are active, that they feel good about, it doesn't mean that mental health can't be a challenge, but it does mean that the sort of the ratios end up being sort of significantly lower. So the message here, sort of relationships matter. I'm gonna have to just shut down the email here on my laptop for a second, because otherwise all of these emails are gonna come in are going to keep buzzing. Okay, sorry about that. So, so that's one large topic. And so we're going to be looking at this topic over the semester, and it intersects with a number of weeks that we're going to be looking at, because mental health is such sort of a big topic, not just sort of the youth mental health. Obviously, we'll deal with it sort of most specifically when we talk about health in a few weeks from now. but it connects to the notion of social interaction. It connects to culture, which we're discussing on Wednesday. It connects to media and the role that media plays in all of this. It connects to class. It connects to education. It connects to family. It connects to work. I mean, really, essentially, it connects to most of sort of the meaningful areas and domains of the social world. And so that's something that will be taken up a bunch of different ways over the course of the semester. A completely different topic, but it's the economic picture, right? Over the course of the last, I would say, sort of 18 months to 2 years, there's been some kind of economic turbulence. And it's not the first time. There's different kinds of turbulences, sort of the housing market and sort of financial sort of downturn, sort of more broadly at the world level. But the latest iteration of it, initiated by the interconnectedness of the world economies. What happens in one country, and specifically what happens in our neighbors down south, what happens in the US, has a significant influence on what happens in within the borders of Canada and what happens, of course, in lots of places throughout the world. And so there is sort of a renegotiation of economic relationships. The sort of the leadership in the province and in the country, in Canada and Ontario, looking to diversify sort of economies because of how closely tied are the Canadian economy, the Ontario economy is to the US economy. And so one of the things we're going to be looking at over the course of the semester is the interconnectedness between countries, between societies, between cultures, and specifically as it pertains to the sort of financial order. So we'll be looking at that through the lens of sort of stratification will be where we'll most take that up. And then in the week on the work and the economy, those are the two places where we're most likely to sort of be dealing with this sort of head on. There is, speaking of sort of the interconnectedness of societies and countries, there are cultural products that are produced by individuals and by groups of individuals and by communities who not just occasionally, but sort of depending on the moment, reach far beyond the boundaries of that community. Obviously, the picture we have here is of K-pop Demon on Her, a movie that came out not even a year ago, in July of 2025. It won within the last sort of month a handful of Oscars. It is and has become a global phenomenon, but there has been global phenomenon, both in terms of music, in terms of movies, in terms of TV shows, from lots of different places around the world. It really, we're talking about here is the intersection between culture and media and globalization. And so how do things become sort of as popular as they are? How do cultural products produced in one environment become adopted and spread sort of beyond the borders? Those are really interesting questions that intersects a number of different topics that are of sort of great interest to sociologists. So that's definitely something we'll be dealing with as early as the next class, which is sort of Wednesday. Another big topic these days, I mean, you can't open a media platform, a social media platform, sort of the regular news, and frankly, even within the confines of the University of Toronto, sort of navigating courses without AI coming up as a topic. It's amazing how quickly we went from having a relatively low-level discussion of artificial intelligence that going back sort of 5 years, 7 years from now ago, a handful of people were sort of immersed in it. A lot of others only had heard of it through sort of popular culture, or small little snippets of news here and there. And now, of course, in many ways, it's upended everything. It's had a really sort of significant growth over a really short period of time. And analysts are starting to talk about this is, there's the pre-AI and the post-AI. I mean, frankly, those analysis were already there, I want to say about 12 months out from the release of, for example, ChatGPT in fall 2022. Maybe that was a little bit more bold of sort of an analysis at the time, but now it's quite clear. It's had echoes in all the different domains of the social world, from health to science to work to education to politics to media to class, things like crime and deviance, social interaction, culture. We're not going to overdo it, but we are going to meaningfully engage with some of the impact that AI has had across many of these domains. Maybe not all of these domains, because there's lots of interesting things to sort of talk about. But it is uh, we have reached a point of no return where this is part of our lives now in the 2026 context, and it makes teaching sociology uh, and about society a vastly different thing than it was even sort of 5 years ago. So that's definitely another big topic we'll be taking up. What we have here is an image that it could have been a number of other images, but speaks to sort of the continued local and sometimes global protests and social movement. Some of those protests are about environment. Some of those protests are about economic decisions that are being made by countries. Some of those protests are about the lack of responsiveness to citizenry, meaning like people are asking for a change to the political infrastructure and want either more rights or more say or more of a voice in what takes place. And some of those protests are about some of the actions of different states. And right now, or not just right now, but this is something that's been fertile for quite a while, but there's definitely some significant social protests that are underway. The depiction here is about the conflict in Gaza, which has been identified by lots of countries, international organizations as highly problematic. And yet it's a messy sort of situation, and there's sort of lots of different pieces to it. We're going to be taking that up as topics to the extent that we will delve into sort of more nuance and more complexity to talk about social movement, how it intersects with culture, how it intersects with media and media depictions, framing around particular issues and how people sort of respond to that. And how it fits within broader notions of sort of crime and deviance. Crime, not just and deviance by individuals or by small organizations, but also when we talk about crime and deviance at the level of states. There's international law, and there's been lots of concerns about, linking back to sort of the notion of sort of tariff, looking back to the war that's been declared on Iran more recently, and of course the conflict that's happening sort of in Gaza. And so these are some of the topics, some of the things that we'll be taking up over the course of the semester. And then finally, as sort of an example, this is not a comprehensive list of things we're going to look at, but sort of a snippet of sort of items in the news or broad sort of social issues are things that are much more mundane that sociologists are also interested in. We're interested in all kinds of social phenomenon that in many different ways represent sort of the quote unquote sort of what makes up society, the glue of sort of society. A queue at a coffee shop or at a restaurant or at a movie theater, or people waiting in line for any purpose that are out there. The rules that are at play when you get onto the TTC, when you're around other human beings, of personal space, of where to sit, where not to sit. Decisions, micro decisions that we make as individuals, or sort of how we operate within these social spaces, including, for example, the classroom, right? There's 142 people on this call. The classroom works to a large extent because although we don't know each other, at least we don't know each other yet, maybe some of you know each other or a handful of other people, but we're largely stranger to one another. And yet, it's not complete chaos. We did not need to spend this morning, 20, 30, 40 minutes arguing about, what should be going on, who should be speaking first, what are we going to do here? there's a lot of structure that's already embedded in the classroom, even if it's a Zoom classroom that allows for this type of social interaction to work. These are all microform of what sociologists call social order. And society is not possible without it. The sort of, I don't want to say endless because that's not a scientific term, but numerous and numerous examples of implicit, sometimes explicit rules that dictate, that guide, that influence, that shape how we behave, how we act, how we interact in any given situations with family members, with friends, with fellow students at the University of Toronto, with strangers as you navigate the city of Toronto. In fact, maybe many of you are not in the city of Toronto right now, as you navigate cities all around the world. So that's a quick, sort of quick cold open, if you will, of some of the, sort of issues that I'm hoping we'll be taking up over the course of the semester. Um, the goal, of course, is to welcome all of you and to expose all of you to the discipline of sociology. Historically, some students have come in with, a handful have taken some social science courses or a social science course in high school or in college. Oftentimes, people may have they've had an interdisciplinary introduction to social science, kind of a mix of psychology and sociology and anthropology. Others may have a little bit more familiarity because if there's some of you that are in third year or fourth year who've taken some courses in connected discipline, then you will see some of those connections here. But the goal of this course and the way it was not designed primarily to be the first course of a four-year degree in sociology. If that happens for a handful or more of you, then obviously that's fantastic from the perspective of our department. But really, that's not how the course was designed. The course was designed to give sort of a set of insight and a set of tools and a set of ideas and findings as a one-off for those who might be sort of interested and who will go on in all kinds of works of life, who will pursue all kinds of careers and pursue all kinds of degrees. That there's something valuable about taking a semester's worth of sociology, and that's really how and what shape this 6-week course. I almost said 12 weeks, but we were on the express lane here in the summer, this 6-week course. I purposely didn't start with sort of my, sort of speaking about myself and wanted to front the course. I'll just take kind of a couple of minutes here just to say a few things that might be sort of relevant. So I'm Christian Caron. I'm professor here at the University of Toronto. I've been here since 2013, so 13 years now, this July. I was at the University of Ottawa before and Carleton before that. I was been teaching for almost 20 years in terms of being the instructor, and then another, I don't know, 5 years or 5, 6 years before that as sort of a teaching assistant. I've taught Introduction to Sociology on and off since 2008. I love this particular course because I get to take insights and work and research from 150 years, tens of thousands of people who've made contributions and get to synthesize some of that, highlight some of the themes, and get to present this to students, oftentimes for the first time. So there's something kind of quite neat about that exercise. Of course, it's quite different than teaching a second, third, fourth, or even, of course, a graduate course on a more narrow topic. I'm French Canadian. It shouldn't come up too much, but if you're picking up an accent, that's what it is. It does come up occasionally because there's a few times where the train tracks of language in my head get a little bit off kilt. And so if that happens again, it could be lack of sleep, but it's most likely the ESL piece. My trajectory briefly. I did not land on sociology from the get-go. My sort of first passion was history, and that's where I have a college degree. And then I pursued psychology, did an undergrad major in psychology. And then I moved into criminology before I landed and found this home in sociology, where in many ways feels like it's the culmination of all these different other interests kind of coming together. I'm the associate chair for the department. The reason that that matters is that, if you have any questions about things that are beyond the confines of this course, about, university or the department or, anything else, you might have been curious about over time, I'm always happy to chat about that stuff. And so you reach out to me. Certainly, we'll hopefully get to, know some of you over the course of the next 6 weeks, but all of you are taking my class. And so I have an open door. You can knock on it, metaphorically anyway, in office hours and emails, or just sort of, reaching out even in things like the chat. And then we can, anything I can help with, I'd love to be able to do that. Maybe we'll take a we, there's too many people here to do sort of a proper um, icebreaker. And I'm not even going to try to have all of you be sent to breakout rooms for 3 minutes so that you can meet 2, 3 of the other students that are sitting in this Zoom class. I tried that once many, many years ago, and I don't know that that was sort of super successful. But I am curious, if you feel like sharing, putting in the chat whether, what year you're in, where you're from, and, maybe briefly why you're taking time out of your summer to take this Intro to Sociology course. If you're willing to share, then other students will be able to see that in the chat, and I can read some of them off, and then we'll proceed. We'll proceed with the class. So I'll just give it a minute or two here. First year from Toronto, fourth year econ major from Nigeria, fulfilling a Brett requirement. That's great. First year, Myanmar, taking this course, interest in sociology. Third year, Chicago. Fourth year, Brett requirement. First year from Toronto for fun. That's good. That's good. Fourth year, Toronto. First year, Toronto. Math and physics. That's great. That's less common, but love to see it. That's one of the beautiful things. I mean, you've been at U of T now. I don't need to tell you tons about the university, but the Faculty of Arts and Science, having math and physics and history and art history and sociology and economics and anthropology all in one faculty, that is not typical. So it does allow for some of these combinations of majors and minors, and then people taking classes across sort of a more wide range of discipline than it would be otherwise. So that's really neat. Toronto, taking a class, learning about sociology before finishing undergrad. The social portion of MCAT, yeah. So that's interesting. I've taught Intro to Soc to broad audiences like we are most likely to have this morning. But I've also taught specific versions of this course for engineering students, specific versions of this course for business students, and specific version of this course for nursing students. Um, Depending on the institution, sometimes those disciplines, those pursuits thought that their students taking a sociology course would be a good thing, and so yeah, it's always really, really interesting to see people from an array of different backgrounds kind of coming in and what they're going to be able to contribute to the discussion. So finish first year, Saskatchewan. My wife is from Saskatoon, and her current family is from Moose Jaw. So special affinity there for Saskatchewan. Welcome. South Korea, Rotman's accounting. Michigan, I saw Chicago earlier. Computer science. Korea, kinesiology. Welcome. I got a bunch of different kinesiology students in the other course I'm teaching this summer, which is the sociology of sports course. Lots of kinesiology students in there. Neuroscience major, fun. Okay, well, thank you for sharing. That's great. Um, so I will say, um, I'm hoping that I will hear from some of you. This is, it's not an in-person class. This is not what I would have chosen. I'm just going to put that sort of a disclaimer out there. It's just the nature of it. There's just been an increasingly higher interest in the summer specifically. Obviously, fall and winter also a little bit as well, but in the summer for online courses. And it's just the enrollment is so much higher for online. It makes sense. Not everyone is located, locally here in Toronto over the summer months. And so the folks that are in Toronto can still enroll in online class, but if it was in person, only the people in Toronto proper would be able to enroll. So we are doing this online. And that being said, while I have the vast majority of my teaching experience is in person, I'm hoping to make this, a really strong, really interesting, really sort of pleasant experience. And so the design is there a little bit to help with that, but I'm also want to hear from all of you because unlike a course I teach in Con Hall, where I'm not saying there's nothing new that comes up, but I've done it for 10, 12 years. Online is a little bit more new for me. And speaking at like my computer screen, because that's not that's not what I would want normally. So I'm hoping to find a couple of different ways for you to sort of contribute to the actual sort of content of the class during each class. And then obviously that's going to be a big component of the tutorial piece, and it's going to be a component of some of the Quarkus piece. But beyond what's laid out, I'm also interested in you reaching out and letting me know how it's going and letting me know what else could happen. And it doesn't mean that, everything that I think there's 260 enrolled right now. I can make sure that it's the all 260 of you have exactly what you want out of this class. That might be a little bit hard, but I am interested in hearing how things are going. So to that effect, I did see a question about slides. I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to pin that. I can say just sort of to remove sort of stress if there's any that slides will be available. They weren't available for today as a first class. The syllabi were sort of the key document pre-class instead, but I will address the issue of slides a little bit later. Okay, so with that, let's move on a little bit with content, being mindful of time. The goal is to broadly introduce you to what sociology is. And so I don't want to oversimplify it, but I want you to think about the analogy of a dictionary versus an encyclopedia versus, for example, reading a full book into a topic. You can ask somebody what is the definition of a particular word, and then you can look it up. These days, it's probably not a print dictionary, but you can look it up in a physical or in a digital dictionary and have a one sentence or short phrase that gives you a definition for a word. It's not inaccurate. But it is a very sort of simplified version of what might be really complex word. Democracy, for example, as a term in the dictionary, doesn't have pages and pages and pages of writing. And the dictionary will still define it in 8, 10, 12 words. But sometimes that's enough. In fact, for many things, maybe the one word, the handful of words, sort of definitions, is more than enough for your purposes. But there's other times you need a little more. And this is where sort of encyclopedia, both the old version, I'm dating myself here, but the old Britannica print, for example, encyclopedias, or what has been the dominating encyclopedia in folks' minds now going two plus decades, which is Wikipedia. You have longer. You don't have a one-word definition, but now you have sometimes not just several paragraphs, but you may have several sections that are delving into different aspects. Is that a comprehensive tour of everything that exists on the topic? Well, of course not. That's silly. But it is more in-depth than what a one-line definition is. And then if you do need more, if you want more, you're looking for more, then there are usually articles and books, and of course, from a multimedia perspective, a lot of content that's created about any given topic where you can consume and consume and consume and get more and more depth and more complexity. And so I'm saying all of this because this is one way to describe what we're doing this semester. But our term is sociology as a discipline. We can start and we will start with a one-line definition. And the one-line definition doesn't really require taking a class. In sociology, a one-line definition is something, anybody can look up quite quickly through, for example, the dictionary. But we're going to want to move beyond the one line. One of the goals, but really a core main learning outcome is that you get to the end of the semester and that you're able to articulate in writing, orally, would be great as well. But there's no oral assessment component in this course. So in writing, you're able to articulate what is sociology. You're able to go beyond the one line and you're able to sort of populate that discussion from what you got, from what you read, from what you heard. You're able to populate it with elements from week 1 and week 2 and week 3 and week 4 to put together something where it would make sense to others to hear or read and say, okay, I understand this a little bit better now. So that's part of the goal. So what is sociology? The one-line definition, which is our starting point, is systematic study of human action and context. It's only, 7 words, and yet it feels a little bit like a mouthful. Systematic study of human action and context. What human beings do, what they feel, what they think, um, and as it appears in all kinds of specific contexts. Now, these contexts are historical contexts, cultural contexts, economic contexts, social contexts. And again, that's not a comprehensive list. But what do human beings do? How do they feel? How they think? So we're interested not just in behaviors, but we're interested in sort of feelings and thoughts, knowledge, and how that varies, how that changes, how that moves, how that evolves. Where's that variation when you start looking at different neighborhoods, when you start looking at different provinces, when you start looking at different countries or different cultures or different religions, or you use other markers that you look at differences in what humans beings do based on age, based on health, based on their media consumption, based on the educations they've received. So the very basic version of what sociology is about is that we are interested in people. And we're interested in what people do, what people feel, what people think, but we're interested in that in the context in which it occurs and the role that the context plays in shaping those actions. And then finally, the systematic study piece, well, it's because sociology is a social science, right? And we're not going to get sort of in a 20-minute sort of discussion here of the minute and sometimes quite significant distinctions between humanities and social science, or between social science and health sciences or natural science, or what's sometimes called applied sciences. But it is a social science. So that will come up a handful of time, including today, but also in your text of what are largely the boundaries. But one of the boundaries that I'm articulating here is that systematic study means it's not based on just, my casual observations or your casual observations. No, casual observations are really, really important. That's how we live our lives. How we live our lives is what we see with our eyes, what we consume, what we hear, what we see, what we want. And that's immensely important. But if we're talking about social scientific knowledge, then our own experiences is not nearly near enough. It's not enough. We need to go well beyond a sample of ourselves, and we need to study things meticulously, carefully, gather evidence, convince other people that what we found is something legitimate, and do so in a systematic way, that with transparency and with humility. So systematic study of human action and context is what sort of sociology so is what sociology is about on sort of the one level. We can talk about sociologists being interested in moving or looking for the general in the particular. And so that's an interesting sort of phrase. And another phrase that gets used is the notion of sort of making the familiar unfamiliar. So I want to unpack these two sort of very briefly because I'm a visual learner. So even though yes, I'm using slides here, but even analogies sort of help me out a little bit. And so I'm going to try a couple of them out. And hopefully one or all of them resonate in particular ways. So looking for the general in the particular is that we are looking for patterns in how in the behaviors of particular individuals. So if we are looking at one toddler, waddling its way around a daycare kind of classroom, we're looking at one. We only have one person. We can only really say things about this one individual that we're observing. We can describe what we see, but we don't have a pattern yet. In order to get a pattern, we need to be observing a number of individuals. We could be observing half a dozen or a dozen or 2 dozen individuals in that daycare and see what are the similarities between them and what are the differences. And then we could compare the behavior of those daycare students to ones that are not in daycare or to ones that are in a different form or different kind of daycare. So looking for the general patterns in the behavior of particular individuals is broadening our scope so that, and this is a representation of one representation of the world map. There's a myriad, there's billions of individuals around the world. Part of what sociology is interested in is looking and finding and identifying and then eventually explaining. And then some will go even beyond that of wanting to change, but identifying, explaining, sometimes sort of changing what those patterns are. So that's called the sort of the general and the particular. Making the familiar unfamiliar. This is something I'm going to turn to just in a little bit when I talk about the social web. So I want to get ahead of myself. So what we're doing here is that sociologists, while we acknowledge, and it's very important, that um, there's something unique about each individual. I know the term snowflake gets used in an incredibly pejorative way, but the first time I heard that to describe people was in a social psych course when I was an undergraduate student. And at the time, it wasn't used in a pejorative way, it wasn't used in a negative way, but it was used to say that every individual, everyone on this call right now, everyone you know, has a unique constellation of sets of experiences of like what they saw, what they read, what they heard, what activities they participated in. They have a unique combination of the impact of their parents and sibling and family members and neighborhoods and communities and schools and teachers and coaches. No one's had the exact same series, or I'm using the word constellation here, of experiences. And so, to the extent that all of these have played a role in shaping who you are, then individuals have this unique kind of quality to them. And yet, that's not the principal feature. You have lots of similarities also, lots of patterns that you see because society acts on different categories of people, sometimes in similar ways. We see that, for example, when we look at how society treats children compared to how it treats adults. We see sometimes how society doesn't treat men and women the same way. We see how, for example, somebody who's more well off economically is treated or is able to navigate in a given social context or society as versus people who have relatively little or have very, very little in terms of economics. So we think sociologically when we realize or notice that some of those categories, some of those social categories that we belong to, shape some of our particular life experiences, right? That being young, being 4 or 6 or 8 or 10, is incredibly influential in determining what our day looks like than if we're in our late teens or early 20s or mid 20s or mid 40s or mid 60s or mid 80s. Yes, there's lots of individuals, to whom different things are happening, but there's something about age as a social category that tells us something really important. That may seem obvious, but that's the first sort of insight, is that it really stresses the social context in which people live are really, really important in understanding people. And so a term that's not quite as obvious, that some of you might be familiar with, but others might not, is the notion of structure and agency. So this may have come up in, an economics course, it may have come up in a poli-sci course, it may have come up in some of those connected sort of social sciences, what we call kind of cognate units, meaning units that are close to one another, including close to sociology. But for many people, that may not be terms they're familiar with. So I'm going to use this more than once over the course of the semester. The goal isn't to sort of have sort of 100% clarity in the next sort of 5 minutes. But structure and agency as a pair of concept is something that's really important to how sociologists make sense of the world around them. And so if we talk about structure and agency, if we talk about agency, we talk about what classically is sort of called free will. We talk about choices. We talk about intentions. Agency comes from this word of sort of agent. You and I are agents in our own life. They're subjects of our own lives. We turn around and we make decisions all the time. We make small decisions. What am I going to wear this morning? Am I going to go out for food today? Which class am I going to take this semester? And then big life decisions. Where am I going to live? What do I want to do with my life? What matters to me in terms of relationship, friendships, romantic relationships, if that's something I'm interested in. We make lots and lots of decisions, meaningful decisions in our lives. So every time we are making a choice, we're making decisions. That's called agency. Structure is the other side of that. Structure is what what falls outside of our immediate control, what falls outside of sort of our realm of sort of influence, but that impacts, it shapes, it structures the choices that are available to us. So an example I give, and then I'd like some participation on sort of our second exemplar. So we'll have two examples, one from me and then one hopefully we can build collectively together. The example I provide is if you're thirsty and you're on university campus, you're on the St. George campus here at the University of Toronto, and you really need a drink, and you're not walking around at the moment with a water bottle with water that's available to you. And what you see is you see a vending machine. And the vending machine has some options. And maybe it has six options, maybe it has eight options, maybe it has only three options. But in the moment, you get to make a meaningful choice. Am I going to actually get something or not get something? Is it worth spending a couple of bucks in order to get that drink that I really, really feel like I need? Or am I going to look for an alternative somewhere else? But if I'm going to make a choice, I need to make a choice out of what's available. Most universities have contracts where you don't see, for example, in the cola side, you don't see Coke and Pepsi available side by side. Most universities have exclusivity contracts with one company or the other that supplies the drinks that are available in their machines. So if you feel like having a Coke, but your university has a contract with Pepsi or some other company, then Coke is not what you're going to get. You feel like having a particular kind of drink, but it's not there in the machine. You can only choose among what's available. So the idea here at its most sort of simple is that we are making choices, but the choices are based on what's there. The choice on what to eat, the choice on what to wear, the choice on what to drink, the choice on where to go, those are impacted by, among other things, what money and what resources you have, what amount of time that you have, what is available within reach, within walking distance, within a short drive, within where you would want to go in order to fulfill these needs. So that's one example. Let's move to the next one, which is education. I'd like to hear from some of you. Again, you can use the chat because I can get to more of them. I would like you to identify what are some things that impact, and you don't have to center yourself in this. This is more of a broader exercise. you what are some of the things that impact a student's ability to do well in a course that falls largely outside their control? So what would impact a student's ability to, I don't want to determine success that it's necessarily an A or a B plus and above, but what are some of the things that would come in and play a role impacting students' distribution, Freudian slip here, impacting students' ability to do well, that falls largely, now largely doesn't mean entirely, but it means largely means like a lot of it is outside their control. Because I think we can probably think about some edge cases where somebody does have some say, but what are the things that fall outside? So let's see if we can come up with, I don't know, I don't have a number in mind, but maybe 10 or 12 or 15 different examples. So the first I see there is disability, Wi-Fi connection. Yeah, Wi-Fi connection. I've never seen that in this exercise, but I mean that's not wrong. Wi-Fi connections are a real thing when you're doing a Zoom class. Is a Zoom midterm, a Zoom final, and then your Wi-Fi connection goes down, or you lose Wi-Fi for a day or two because of a storm, and there's an assignment due. Yeah, that would be a problem. Mark distribution, yeah. So are there, constraints out of a, college or university for what marks are supposed to look like that may have a role to play? Commute time, technology, personal troubles. So that's a really big category, but thank you for that. I mean, personal troubles could be lots of different things, right? Language, absolutely. ESL plays, ESL or other things tied to language. Anxiety, yes. Neurodivergence, absolutely. What are the profs good at teaching? No, that's a good point, Judy. Like, is the instruction clear? Are the expectations laid out in a way that makes sense? Am I sitting there listening, but I have no idea what's going on? And then I'm being asked to do work and I have no idea what's being asked. Or I sit down for an exam, I mean, worse, and I don't know what's happening. This doesn't feel at all in line with what we've learned in a class. That's a horrible feeling. Unlucky final seasons. Yes, schedule. Absolutely, right? You get three exam in 1.5 day. That doesn't quite meet the exam conflict policy, but ends up being like all really crunched together. Mental health, commute, attention span, distance, commuting, learning style, financial standing, having to work during class time. Yeah, well, work during class time, and also like you have some students who are have to work, full time, or who have to work a really significant number of hours only to be able to be at university or at the college they're attending. And so finances definitely has something to do with that. So disorders, other commitments, external commitments, affordability, family problems, political conflict, yes. We have faculty in our department whose family were and continue to be impacted by what's going on in terms of the conflict in the Middle East, and families that are at risk and families that are in danger. Same things with people who have family, for example, in Ukraine and lots of other places around the world where the level of danger is quite high. Those have real meaningful impact on people. Okay, so thank you for all of that. So then the idea is, are grades reflective of somebody's effort and somebody's level of understanding and somebody's sort of merit in terms of the amount of time that they've invested in a particular course? Well, yes, grades have a relationship with that. Otherwise, not sort of paying attention to the fact that grades are impacted by decisions that students make, taking harder courses, easier courses, outside their comfort zone courses on topics that they were already familiar with. All of these may end up sort of playing a role as well, but grades reflect that. They do reflect choices that students make, but they don't reflect the choices that students make exclusively. The outcome in education, including specific classes, but we could extend that to how well somebody's doing in university or college more broadly, or how well somebody did in high school, is impacted by other things, right? There's a death in the family, there's a crisis at home, it has dependents, they're looking after younger siblings, they're looking after their own children, they're looking after an elderly, parent or grandparent. They're going through a breakup. There's lots of different things that can come in and impact. And of course, one of the themes that came up a couple of times here were around health and mental health, both health and mental health, and how they're connected. And both of them would have an impact on educational outcomes. So, so this is a really good, helpful, I think, exercise for structure agency, right? Structure and agency are two really important pieces. And as sociologists make sense of the social world around us, we need to be mindful of both. We ignore agency, then we end up talking about how we're all automatons, we're all sort of puppets, we're all just purely 100% the outcome of our family or education or whatever else, and we have nothing left in terms of decision making, in terms of choices, in terms of making meaningful sort of pivot and in our lives. No, there's no space for that. So obviously we find that problematic. So agency needs to remain at the forefront. But the agency is not, it's not boundless, it's not limitless. It happens within context. And if you have, pardon the language, but you have a shitty prof, and the jury's out on whether or not I'm going to be one of those, you'll be the judge of that by the time we get to the end of the semester. But that has a real impact. And things that are going on home have a real impact. And things that are going on in your family and in the city and where you are have a real impact. And availability of resources have a real impact. That's structure. So as we try to paint a picture of, for example, how well students are doing in university, how well students are doing at U of T, and we want to know why students are doing well or why students are struggling or why they're falling, like what are the factors that impact it, we are looking at both agency and structure. We're looking at decisions and choices that students are making, and we're looking at structure, things that fall outside of decisions of students, and what happens there. So what this is essentially is what's called a critique of the neoliberal subject. And so what that means, the neoliberal subject is a subject that's unfettered. The neoliberal subject is a subject that is where the outcome of one's life is almost entirely, if not fully, based on the choices and decision that somebody has made. So somebody is successful or somebody is struggling, it is the result of the individual and what the individual did or did not do. Um, we are contextualizing this by adding another layer to it, which is the structure layer, to give us a more complex, more nuanced, and we believe, a much more accurate picture of things that take place. Opportunities and constraints are not evenly distributed in the population. So it's not like every single one of you has, yes, Jaina, it is very much this idea of meritocracy, meaning that it is a critique of what we call pure meritocracy. Again, merit has something to do with it. If merit had nothing to do with it, then getting up this morning and coming to this class as versus doing any other number of things that probably would provide you with more joy and more immediate sort of payoff in terms of something that makes you happy is would have no consequences. So merit is part of the picture, but meritocracy, which is that the stratification is purely based on merit, is something that's heavily critiqued by many of the social sciences, but certainly by a significant portion of the work that's being done in sociology. Then there's Judy asked a question whether or not agency depends on structure. Yes, I mean the relationship between the two is bidirectional. I don't want to get that too much in the weeds today as it's a first class, but yes, structures is that last line here. It unevenly distributes opportunities and constraints, right? If you know somebody, this is the whole social networking piece. If you know someone or your family knows someone, maybe you get opportunities, job opportunities, or other kind of opportunities that you may not have gone otherwise. It doesn't mean you didn't do anything to deserve it, but it means that an opportunity came up partly because of someone you knew. And so the opportunities are not evenly distributed, and the constraints, as you've identified a number of them having to do with education, the constraints are not evenly distributed either. So both of those things are important for our purposes. Structure ends up constraining agency and allowing agency to flourish in different ways. And then as we look later the semester, agency in turn impacts structure. This is where protests and social movements and you as an individual working with a group of people as employees in a place or dealing with customers or dealing with family members, like you can and you do have under certain circumstances a meaningful impact on how structure is felt for others, on how the structure sort of works, on making changes to that, on changing that, on challenging that, on wanting it to be a different way, and then taking your actions or other people taking their actions, or more often collectively, lots of people taking action together to make changes. Make changes at the macro level. We'd be talking about changes to the political system or economic system, but at the micro level, changes to relationships, changes to family, changes to the workplace, changes to like the locales where you're operating in. So one word that encapsulates sort of this notion of structure and agency, or the pay attention to both, which is in the first chapter of your text, is this notion of the sociological imagination. And so sociology stresses the social context. This is sort of a summary a little bit. This is what I've been talking about the last sort of 20, 25 minutes. Sociology stresses the social context in which we live, and how these contexts influence us, how these contexts influence our lives, our thoughts, our actions, our feelings, our knowledge. And at the core of this is this notion of the sociological imagination. Now, that was termed by C. Wright Mills. This is the first time I'm going to say this, but probably not the last time. You're not being tested on dates or on names. I'm giving you this for reference. C. Wright Mills is the one who wrote about this phenomenon. It crystallizes what many thought sociologists had been doing all along, and then it's a term that became popular enough that it gets widely used now to talk about this. It's a way of looking at the world that allows you to see the link between things that are happening to you, what we would otherwise call like private problems or personal problems, and then things that are happening more broadly around, right? If I lose my job and I'm the only one who lost my job, that's probably a personal trouble or a private problem. It doesn't mean it's my fault, but it's happening to me. It's like me singularly. I'm the only one who lost my job, let's say right now. Versus there's an economic downturn and there's tens of thousands of people who lose their job. There's a factory that closes. There's a business that went under. There's Spirit Airlines in the US that closed for business over the weekend, and lots of people losing their jobs. That is no longer just a personal private problem. It's something bigger than that. You're experiencing anxiety during your first semester. I'm not saying it's just the first semester, just to be clear, but you're experiencing anxiety that first semester of university. That's quite typical. That is not just a private problem. Like the strong feeling of like anxiety that hits students, oftentimes at midway point of that first semester, and then for like a 4 to 6 week period, dealing with from like mid-November on to the end of the final exam period. Like that's something that's widely shared. So that is no longer just a private problem. It is both a private problem and something that's connected to a broader issue. So the sociological imagination is seeing the link. Again, it's the general and the particular. It's looking at individuals. It's being curious about you, about me, about people you know. But we're curious about those individuals, not just to get to know those individuals better. We're curious about those individuals to sort of come to some insights about more broader insights about things that are impacting sort of all of us, or all of us is not quite right, that impacting many of us. So at the center of this is that we're influenced. We're influenced by society. We're influenced by the group of people we share culture with. We're influenced by our family. We're influenced by our teachers. And so in order to find out why people do what they do, we're interested as sociologists, I said earlier, sort of map out social context, but also map out what we call social location. So where are you situated socially within society? And I list here a handful of them, but your occupation, your income, your education, your gender, your age, your ethnicity, your sexuality, your family, your media patterns, like these all mark some different social locations that you inhabit, which in turn have an impact and influence on how you see the world and how you behave and how you are. I'm going to go on for just a couple more minutes, and I'm going to take sort of a 5-minute pause. I'm being mindful that I do want to give everyone sort of a chance, even though Zoom, I know that one of the few benefits of that is that people can go to the bathroom and can go out or can go and pick up the phone if they need to while the sort of the class is going on. But nonetheless, I need a glass of water. And so we'll take a 5-minute break just in a few minutes from now. And then I did see a couple of questions come in the chat that I didn't address sort of earlier. I'll try to speak to those as well during sort of the short break. So what I've described here, a lot of it is not just sociology, right? Sociology is, or at least as I understand it, is a very elastic discipline. But part of why it's elastic is because it touches on so many different things. The social world, I mean, that really involves everything. Every human being, everything they've ever done, everything they've ever thought, everything they ever did. Um, and yet, there's other disciplines, both in the humanities and the social sciences, that are really interested in some of these things as well, and of course in the natural sciences too. So we share sociology comes in contact with a multiplicity of other academic disciplines. History and philosophy are really important pieces and connections to sociology, mostly because sociology emerged out of philosophy. Social philosophers were the earliest to articulate the academic discipline of sociology. Sociology is embedded in history. In order to make sense of today in 2026, we need to know where we came from. We need to know how things are different in 2026 than they were in 2022 and in 2018 and 2010 and then in 2000 and 1990s and 1960s and before that. We share a lot in common with psychology, especially when we're talking about social psychology, intergroup relations, the realms around sort of personality, more than the pieces are sort of on the neuroscience side of it, or the sort of the cognitive sort of side of it, but the developmental psychology, abnormal psychology intersects with crime and deviance a significant amount. Developmental psychology intersects a lot with sociology of aging, sociology of health, sociology of family. There's lots and lots of connections with this. And we also, at the university here, have, including faculty members that are cross-appointed, have really strong connections between sociology and political science, anthropology, economics, geography, linguistics, and several others. So let me take the pause here before I do precursors. So I have 10:13 sort of on my watch. I'm going to pause until 10:18. Give me a chance to read back up a little bit on the questions on the chat, and then I'll resume with our shorter second half of sort of lecture in 5 minutes. Okay, I'll see you in a second.
Such does something. Yeah. I'm gonna it's
You're unmuted, Lola. We can hear you. I don't know if that's a problem or not, but you
Okay,
can.
I just came to make sure everything was going okay.
Oh, good.
Okay. Okay. So it's longer. Okay. Thank you.
Another minute on my watch. I went back and looked at the chat. First, I missed, of course, a bunch of different comments that some of you made about the um, identifying yourself at the earlier front and then on the education piece. But I saw three sort of sets of questions that are kind of like admin related questions, and so I will 100% speak to those. And so the questions I'm seeing come up both in like DMs, direct messages, and in the main chat, having to do with slides, recordings, and tutorials. So I guarantee you I will speak to those things before we're done today, and I will stick around for an hour after class today. Anybody who wants to stick around and sort of chat, but I will address those before we're done. Oh, we are precursors. So I mentioned briefly that sociology was born out of history and philosophy. That's certainly true. The discipline of sociology is not that old. It's just a few hundred years old. And it came into being with the rise of the modern sort of nation state. I'm probably not going to get into too much of that sort of today, but there is more detail on this in the first chapter, in the first chapter of the text. But I'm going to speak just a little bit on the precursor to sociology that will end up mattering for us over the course of the sort of the semester, which is that the key. And so, if there's any philosophers that are taking class here, I sort of apologize in advance that we're in a way kind of bastardizing a little bit or simplifying sort of a little bit in order to kind of get these concepts for our for this audience. But hopefully, I'm still doing them justice a little bit. But there's two key ideas from philosophy that underpin not just sociology, but underpin, frankly, all sciences. We talk about ontology and epistemology. So if you have familiarity with those words, that's great. And if you don't, let me just try to give you sort of a quick piece of it. Ontology is what is real. You don't have any scientific pursuit without having an idea that you are dealing with real objects. And so again, I'm a kind of visual kind of metaphor sort of learner, so I'm going to use a very unserious example here, but ghosts, okay? Let's assume for a moment, and I don't mean to insult anybody, but let's assume for a moment that ghosts aren't actually real, okay? That ghosts aren't a thing. That ghosts don't exist. So ghosts are not real. If ghosts are not real, in my example, then I can't study ghosts, right? They don't exist. I can't study ghosts because ghosts don't exist. But what is real is people's beliefs about ghosts. And so I can study beliefs. I can study depictions of ghosts in drawings, in movies or TV shows. Those are real. So I can study that. I can study cross cultural variations in historical traditions having to do with ghosts. I can study how people may avoid certain places because they're scared of ghosts and they believe that a particular house or particular area of the city or particular area of the forest is haunted. I can study behaviors that are shaped by the belief in ghosts. So if I don't think something exists, I can't study it. It seems very, very obvious, but it is the first building block to any science. You don't have a discipline of sociology or economics or political science or anthropology or criminology if you don't have things that you hold to be real at the center of it. And so sociologists believe that the social world and the impact it has is real, that there's lots of evidence for it, and we study it. We study people's actions, people's knowledge, people's feelings. That's the ontology. That is the what is real sort of underpinning to sociology. Now, the for me, even more interesting question is the epistemology question, which is how do we know what we know? And I love this. And when we have more time, I love to spend a lot of time here. That's not going to be today. That's not going to be this morning. But briefly, how do you know what you know? Right now, maybe a lot of you are sitting, maybe a handful of you are standing. Where you're sitting, where you're standing, you have knowledge, right? You have knowledge you've accumulated over 2 decades, 3 decades, 4 decades, maybe some of you even more than that. How do you know what you know? Where does that come from? Right? Where's that knowledge that you have in your head that you would be willing to communicate, that you could sort of mobilize if you need to? Where does that come from? Like what are the sources of that knowledge? What are the places where you gathered that? What are the experiences that you've gone through? And then what are, for example, what are the senses that you use in order to pick that up? Like you use your eyes, your ears to sort of see things, to hear things that give you knowledge. Epistemology gets into like how does an academic discipline like sociology, how do they know what they know? Like how do we know what we know as sociologists? And so what is real? Ontology, how do we know what we know? Epistemology. The early sort of social philosophers contributed to classical sociological theory because they asked questions about the social world. They were curious about the social world. What they weren't doing is they weren't systematically studying the social world. They weren't doing science. They weren't taking their question and breaking them down and identifying variables and identifying factors and controlling for a bunch of different pieces and looking for and marshaling evidence in order to make particular claims. That's the shift from social philosophy to social science. But nonetheless, it's in the foundations. Ibn Khaldun is now increasingly recognized as kind of the first social philosopher working from a sociological perspective. He worked on developing theories about the rise and fall of civilization and the concept of social cohesion. So how is like some societies that it looks like there's a lot of bonds between people. And there's a really kind of cohesive set of like people sort of really kind of connecting with those around them. And in other places where that wasn't so much the case. He emphasized environmental and economic and social factors in shaping human society. And again, he did this work hundreds of years before the formal creation of sociology as an academic discipline. But he's a really good example of an early social philosopher. So again, the birth of sociology oftentimes gets described as the net outcome of three revolutions. This is a simplified version of the story, but For the purposes of this course, that will be good enough. You have the scientific revolution that took place in the 1500, that's the 16th century, that encouraged the use of evidence, right? We went from knowledge is mostly based on tradition. It's mostly based on what's been handed down from within one's culture, within one sort of group, within one society, from elders down to the youngs, to like we need to approach evidence. We need to gather evidence. We need to prove or disprove things using sort of this new methodologies. So that's the 15th, that's the 1500 or the 16th century. This is before sociology, but it was a necessary step. The second one is what's called the democratic revolution. This is the 18th century in the 1700s, not just in one locale, but in many different locales around the world. There was these really vast, significant changes that took place. And we're talking about revolutions where systems, for example, of aristocracies and monarchies got overthrown and replaced by some version of a democracy. I say some version because it doesn't look like the democracy that we would identify now, say in Canada in 2026, but nonetheless, it is, and it gets described as a democratic revolution, the idea that human actions can change society. And I know that now that will be very much taken for granted, but that wasn't always the case. And finally, the Industrial Revolution. There is no sociology without the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution is a rapid change leading to the rise of the manufacturing sort of sector, individuals moving in droves from the land that their families and ancestors had been occupying for generations, and people migrating in droves towards cities and replacing their mostly self-reliant labor of looking after their home, looking after their land, looking after their families, sort of in individual units, to now exchanging their labor for money, working on a factory floor, doing the same thing over and over and over and over again for 12, 16-hour days in exchange for pay. The Industrial Revolution took all of these myriads of different people and brought them all together. And I don't mean together as in like one big family. I mean, it made them live right next to one another. Families went from having a handful of families within multiple kilometers of their homes to living now within tens of thousands of people living within those same kilometer radius. So that gave rise to a whole host of different issues. Cities having to manage populations, health, education, work, government, like all of these. It's not like these things didn't exist before, but they all crystallize and change and adapt in a different way. And it gave the rise for a need for a science to say, okay, how are we going to do this? How we are going to go from we used to have a few hundred people living in this town or in this village to now we have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people living right next to each other, in conflict with one another, hurting each other, stealing from one another, like with different needs. Like, how do we take care of and put in place things that are necessary in order for the city and the people within it to thrive? So these three revolutions, scientific, democratic, and industrial, were really important and gave birth to the rise of sociology. So a slide I probably should have added a little bit earlier, but I'm going to put it here. When I talked about social sociology as a social science, we talk about scientific knowledge. There's a couple of different characteristics of that. So I just wanted to take a minute here to sort of speak to this. I'm going to come back to this a few more times over the course of the semester. But the idea that to be a good scientist, there's a really healthy dose of skepticism. We don't take the world or the subject matter we're interested in for granted, but we seek to quote unquote take it apart or look at it in a really deep level in order to understand its complexity and its nuance. So as social scientists, we call the world that we see into doubt. right? It's not because things were done seemingly in one particular way that this is the only way it was done. We need to look at a cross-cultural, cross-social, cross-historical perspective and see that there's lots of really differences. Science is about meticulously, I used the word systematic earlier, meticulously controlling for errors. We go beyond tradition and authority. We go beyond what I said earlier, which is our own anecdotal experiences. Our experiences are really important to live our lives, but they're not a good basis for scientific knowledge. And we need, and this is really important, we need to confront alternative possibilities, right? When something is good enough, then it's good enough, right? If I made eggs this morning, I actually didn't, I'm a little hungry right now, but if I made eggs this morning, I don't need to make eggs like to study and find out what are all the ways in which people have made eggs over the course of the last several hundred years. Learn what those techniques are, try them all out, and then find out which one I like best before I make myself some eggs. Like I don't need that in order to enjoy it. I may have tried a handful of different versions from, my parents to a few restaurants to a few friends to relationships. And now I've landed to, oh, this is what I feel like this morning. Is that a comprehensive look at everything that's been done, of all the possibilities that are out there? No, it's not. But it would be ludicrous for me to do that in order to choose what to wear, to choose where to go, to choose what to eat. Like it would lead to status quo. It would lead to sort of paralysis. I would not move on because I'd be continually sort of mapping out all the different possibilities before I felt comfortable making a decision. But science needs to do that. Science needs to consider all the possibilities. Science, by its very nature, does need to look at all the different possibilities that are available and rule them out. If I'm going to say this is what's going on, the explanation for this is X or Y or Z, I need to have ruled out everything else. I need to draw on information that's from a much larger size of cases than what I would come across as an individual. And my conclusions can only come once I've gotten a really, really good sense of the whole. Now you'll say, how is that possible, right? How is one academic, one sociologist, one social scientist, frankly, this would apply to a physicist, to a biologist, to folks from across the discipline. One individual can't possibly, on their own, consider all the possibilities and observe and draw from all of the different possible cases that are out there. That's why work in the scientific realm gets done by the scientific community. Yes, it may start originally with one person or a small group, but the more a topic becomes of interest, the more there's like something meaningful and like relevant in there that will have like a real impact, the more people will join that area, the more people will contribute to that area, and then the deeper the roster of people working on that will be. So work is not done as individuals. Work is done as part of sort of a community. Now that's the birth of sociology. But of course, sociology was born a while back. We have there's been some different iterations over time. The early sociologists or the earliest sociologists were interested and concerned with the notion of stability and order on the one hand, versus change. And so you have different authors like Emile Durkheim, like Martineau, like Spencer, like Kant, that were most interested in the question of stability. Like, how do you maintain a stable society as you have all these diverse populations now living right next to one another? And then on the other hand, authors like Marx and Weber and Simmel were interested in change. Were interested in the motors of change and the engines of change and how did change come about and how should change come about. In the North American context, there's a sort of a rich history of sociology in the US and in Canada going back to the early 20th century, so the first decade of the 1900s. Chicago School and Jane Addams and W. Du Bois and E.W. Wells Barnett in the US, S.D. Clark and John Porter are foundational sort of figures in Canada. So this is a lot of names, right? This is a slide full of names. being tested on names, but they're important figures. And so in your text, there's a little bit said about each of them. The really kind of the key takeaways for that. I'll come back to this sort of later, but it will be, what are the themes, right? What does it mean to be concerned with social order? What does it mean to be concerned with change? What are some of the things that emerge out of the North American context and its contribution to sociology? We're not going to focus so much this semester on being able to attach that to particular people. And so while that's the beginning, sociology in 2026 has really been impacted by all of these processes. Right? Zation, any word that ends in zation is a process of. Industrialization is the process of things going from pre-industrial to industrial. Urbanization is the process by which people move into cities, away from the this is a ESL moment, away from the not I want to say non-city. There's a proper word for that. I can't think of it right now. I apologize. Um, you've got let's see if no, I thought maybe somebody would pipe in and sort of say, like, this is what you're looking for. Rural. The distinction when people moving in great numbers from rural areas of a society or a country into the urban sector. Secularization is a process by which sort of religion goes through an evolution. Secular is usually means absence of sort of religion. So secularization is where there's been a pushback on the impact of religion, for example, in a given society, on its impact on education, its impact on politics, and its impact on health. So that's a process. Rationalization is the rise of bureaucracies, efficiency, getting your most bang for your buck, sort of like pro-con lists and making sure you have the most pros and the least amount of cons. So sort of that way of thinking and approaching and organizing is rationalization. Globalization is probably the one most of you are familiar with out of this list, but globalization is the previously isolated cultures and economies becoming more and more interconnected with one another. And then colonization, right? The conquering of one group of people by another group of people, and then establishing and imposing, oftentimes, their worldview, their values, their culture, their language, their economic system, their political system onto that group of people. And so we're going to come back and revisit all of those. This is by no means sort of an in-depth discussion about any of them right now, but these are really important processes that have led to like massive changes in the world. The world is different today, not just because of these things, but significantly different because these processes have taken place. And so that's important for sociologists. It's important to look at. So sociologists take all of this and they ask questions. Why is the first questions at the bottom of the slide as versus the top? I don't know, but we ask a series of questions. And these questions, in a way, echo some of the themes we're taking up in each of the week over the course of the next 6 weeks. How do we see the world? What is culture? What is Canadian culture? What role does it play in our lives? How do we become the people that we are today? How do we form our opinion? What effect does our class position on how we live our lives? There's more, like how does the work landscape, right? How does AI or work in 2026 or work in 2030 and beyond impact what people are interested in and how they see their career trajectories over the course of the next couple of decades? What role does the family play in their lives in shaping who you are? What kind of aspirations do each of you and people that you know have for families you may want to form or may not want to form sort of in the future? Education continues to be a really important sort of field, but it's also an increasingly polarizing field. There's debates about what education should be, right? Vocational education versus more of a liberal arts education. Like there's debates about curriculum. There's debates about what ought and ought not to be covered. There's been a lot of attention in the news in the last 5 to 10 years. Battles and fights about what should or shouldn't be taught to elementary school kids and high school kids, or high school students. What role has health and mental health played in the lives of people, in the lives of the people that you know? Why is it that there is so much more discussion of mental health? Why are there so many more people who identify some aspect of their mental health as being compromised, especially at different points in time, and as it intersects with family and school and work and other fields of work? And then finally, talking about criminalization. Right? Criminalization is a process by which things are turned into crime. Decriminalization is a process by which things that previously were treated as crime are no longer treated as crime. What's the relationship between crime and deviance, right? Crime is usually its laws, deviance has to do with norms. What is and how close of a relationship do those three things have with one another? What are the circumstances where things are considered deviant but not criminal? Things are treated as criminal, but they're actually not considered deviant. That's going to be the heart of our last substantive lecture, which is the lecture on crime and deviance, one I'm particularly sort of interested and excited about. So um, this is a partial list of areas that sociologists are invested in. The CSAs and the ASAs, the Canadian Sociology Association, the American Sociology Association has like 50 plus areas that are active that, hundreds and thousands of people are contributing to. This is a partial list. We are taking up 9 to 10 of these over the course of the semester. This is where I wanted to get. It's my conclusion in the next kind of couple of minutes before I can turn to admin things. Um, this is you did not turn the channel by mistake. This is indeed the spider web. I use this as an analogy for the social web. I don't know how often any of you have looked at a spider web very closely. Maybe some of you are familiar and some of you are not. But a spider web, while it's around and while it can be noticed, has a great deal of patterns attached to it. If you look at it carefully here, you'll see, right, these straight lines all coming from the middle and going out. And then you'll see that these lines are crossed by these circles that are becoming increasingly bigger. So there are a lot of patterns that are found in here. And while all the topics that I just had on the previous slide, or the topics you might be interested in, are all may look like they're all different, they're all interconnected. Whether we're talking about gender, or education, or health, or politics, or migration, or crime, all of these topics are part of the same sort of social world. And part of what the sociologist does is that we zoom in, just like I zoomed in here on a spider web. We zoom in and we start interrogating some of these lines or some of these intersections. Let's pretend for a moment that one of these lines is the political affiliation line. And now we're going to map that out and say, how does that intersect with education? How does that intersect with work? How does that intersect with culture? How does that intersect with education? How does that intersect with age, with gender, with race, ethnicity? How does that intersect with religion? So we are following one topic, but we're following one topic as it crosses, as it intersects with all of these other elements. And as I said earlier, we can't, as an individual, do all of this on our own. We are furthering the knowledge that the scientific community has about the social world. And so everyone who contributes, whether that's you or me or anybody else, are contributing to that body of knowledge that already exists. And we'll be looking at a sample of that over the course of the semester. What your texts you will see, and I will only name them today. I will come back to this on Wednesday. But what you'll see in every chapter of your text, and we'll deal with in many of the weeks of lectures, is that there's different sociological perspectives that are employed in order to study all of these different topics. And I'm naming 5 here. It's a taxonomy. That means it's a classification system that distinguishes different ways in which sociologists do this. Functionalists are curious about the role, function, and purpose of thing. What is the role or function of education, of family, of media? Conflict perspective is curious about inequality, about power, about who benefits, who's benefiting from the way in which education is currently organized. Where are the inequality that leads to be some people having more opportunities and some people and some groups having less? Feminist perspective focuses on interrogating the category of gender. And category of gender is not fixed. It's a social category. We're going to get into that sort of later, but interrogating that category and the implication that comes from that. And it's made a significant contribution within the social sciences, including sociology. Symbolic contractionists are curious about meaning. What does it mean to you? Right? What does it mean to listen to music you adore? What does it mean to watch your favorite movie? What does it mean to spend time with your best friend or with your mom or your dad or with a sibling? Like, what meaning do you attach to different symbols, to different things you see, to different experiences that you go through? That's the symbolic contractionist sort of perspective. And then finally, post-structuralist. Post-structuralist is a little bit harder to sort of define in one line, but it is a dominating perspective within the social sciences and sociology specifically now for going almost on for 50 years. But it rejects particular forms of what's called essentialism and universalism. Essentially, it says that these big things we talk about, like society, like democracy, like liberty, like things even like gender or sexuality or race or age, that all of these categories, what we attach to them, how we understand them, it's different. It's different now than it was 20 or 30 or 50 years ago. It's different between some of us right now in this same Zoom room. It's different between different groups of people and how we understand these ideas. And these different understandings matter. They matter quite a bit. So these objects don't always have an essence or a universal kind of quality to them, but they're fluid and complex and changing. And so not everyone loves the post-structuralist approach. Some people do love it. So we'll be talking about that many times over the course of the semester, but that's one of the sociological perspectives. And finally, I'm about 2 minutes over where I wanted to be for the lecture component, but finally, um, different sociologists have different objectives. And so you may come across some of us and some readings and some aspects in your text and some conversations with people, and it doesn't look like everyone's following or pursuing the same goal. And that would be right. Some, their principal task as they see it is to describe the social world, offer the best, most accurate, most authentic account of what goes on in the lives of people, what goes on in institutions, what goes on in organizations, what goes on around the world. That's describing the social world. Others may be involved in description, but their main objective is to understand. They don't want to sort of describe what's going on. They want to know why it's happening. Why are people doing what they're doing? Why is the organization or has these policies? Why is Canadian society structured in the way that it is? And so it's a different set of tools, but it's seeking a different set of answers and answering sort of the why question, the understanding question. And then some see this beyond the objectives of sociology, and others see that as the principal objectives of sociology. So that's part of the elasticity and the fluidity and the dynamic aspect of the discipline, is that some see it as not enough to describe or even to understand the social world, but they see it as their goal and their objective to make the social world better around them. Now, there's some cases where that's a bit more obvious than others. If I'm a scholar that's working on domestic violence or intimate partner violence, I may not be just interested in describing how much of it there is or understanding why it's happening, but I may be interested in policy making, in rules and laws and education and other moments of interventions to make that phenomenon less than it is, to decrease its incidence, for example, to have interventions earlier and better and more effective. And so you have people who are doing social science, and specifically here doing sociology, in order to influence or improve some law, some policy, some way in which we understand the world in order to make it better than it currently is. So those are three sets of objectives, and that encapsulates a little bit what we're dealing with here in terms of the discipline of sociology. Okay, I'm going to take just a moment to take my breath, and then I'm going to uh, rural. Yes, thank you, Asnia. The rural was the word I was looking for. I just wanted to look at chat and see if I missed anything that's on there. So evaluation, and structures and admin sort of more broadly. The course has these different components. What I just did this morning is sort of the what. This is the how, sort of the pieces of the semester and what you're being asked, just sort of how you're being asked to engage with the content. Peer contributions, lecture reflections, tutorials, a sociological thinking and AI literacy assignment, and then a midterm and a final. And then there's a note in there. This is mostly from the syllabi. There's a note in there about adaptive sort of weighing. I'm not going to say too much about that now, but I'll talk about it more when we get closer to the midterm. But this idea that, the midterm is worth 20, but if you do better on the final, then I will reduce for each of you on the individual level. For each of you that do better on the final, I will increase the value of the final and decrease the value of the midterm so that you have more of the weight that goes to the final if you did better there. It's an opportunity to, if you have an early stumble or you don't do as well as you wanted to early, that you have an opportunity to sort of make adjustments and do better on the final and have that count for more. But for those of you who do really well on the midterm, then you've got that banked. So let me get to the other four sort of briefly, but I'm going to focus on the lecture reflection because that's the only one that has sort of a timely piece to it. Tutorials don't start until Wednesday. I will speak about those on Wednesday, and the assignment we won't really discuss until Monday next week. So I will talk about the assignment starting on Monday. The peer contributions, it's the idea that each of you have things to contribute. I saw that, all the backgrounds from all the different disciplines. You are also living in this world. You're operating in this world. You've seen things, you've experienced things, you've read things. I want you for a certain number of times over the course of the semester on topics that you're interested in, that you feel like you've got something to contribute, that you make a reflections. The idea is that 100 words, it's not onerous in terms of amount, but you write 100 words or more where you are posting a reflection, a clarification, relevant material, some insight from another course, something you saw in media, something you experienced firsthand about any of the given topics. There's going to be a discussion board for each topic. You choose when you make these contributions. You have until the last class, and every post you make that gets credited will count towards 0.5 towards this component. The second thing you can do, and I think one of your colleagues maybe has already earned 1.5% from doing that, but it's answering colleagues' questions. So if somebody asks, where are the recordings, what's going on with the slides, where's the tutorial links, like if you have information that somebody else is curious about and you offer a clarification and you answer their question, then that's a contribution. It's not a substantive contribution as in like on the substantive content of the course, but it is a contribution because you're helping someone else out. And because there's 260 in this class, because we want the clarifications to happen in a public forum where once I give it once or twice, then enough of you know of it and you can spread it to everyone else. It's a more effective way to kind of get the information to everyone than doing so through email. So that's the peer contribution piece. Lecture reflection. So the lectures are recorded. They're not recorded because you're supposed to treat this class as an asynchronous course that you can listen to the recording in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks from now if that's when you have time. But they're recorded because not everyone can make it for every single lecture. People will be late, technological issues, there's something else that comes up. And it feels punitive if I'm going to be talking at a camera and at a computer that I don't have recordings made available. So recordings will be there. They'll be available a few hours after the lecture. But you're expected to keep up with them. That means if you can't attend from 9 to 11 on Monday morning, then you are listening to the lecture later that day or the next day. And the lecture reflections are there to anchor that. It's a prompt that's offered where you are writing a little something having to do with the reading or the lecture, usually sort of anchored on the lecture and how it connects to the readings. But you're writing a little something and you're submitting it on Quarkus. There's 12 classes. That means there's 12 reading or lecture reflections. You have to complete 10 over the course of that time. If you're sick and you're out of commission for 72 hours where you can't attend and you can't watch it and you can't submit anything for a couple of days and you end up missing a deadline, well, you have two that you can miss that way. You end up missing more than that, then you reach out and we figure something out. These reflections are cumulative, means that you write in one Word document, and every time you submit a new one, you just add more to that document. We'll take it slow, but we'll make it clear sort of how things work. The first one, the one for today. So after today's lecture, I'd like you to do a first attempt at describing what sociology is. And then it's a two-parter attached to that. What are you hoping to better understand about the social world, about society by the end of the course? 200 to 250 words. I don't love always doing sort of the strict sort of word count, but then if I don't do that in a class of this size, invariably it stresses people out. People will say like, do you want 100? Do you want 500? Like really, what are you looking for? So about 2 to 250. Do I care, more than anything else if you have 175? No, I don't. Should you write, 400 or 500 words? No, you probably shouldn't. Try to stay around 250. Focus on one or two key ideas. Use your own words. These are not heavily polished, heavily edited pieces of work. We just want to see you engage and reflect your own thinking. And these become sort of early practice for higher stake assignments, which is the assignment, the midterm, and the final. So in a way, this is practice. There'll be other forms of practice, but in a way, this is practice. You're writing a doc or an RTF or PDF. This is very sort of technical, but you submit that. And then this first one, it's due in 2 days. It's due before class starts on Wednesday. So it shouldn't take too long to put together. Historically, I don't know, students have told me anywhere in the in the 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Some people will spend more early, but it shouldn't take a lot more than that. You sit down, you think about the question, you have a couple of point forms you want to address, and then you type it up in sentences in a paragraph, and then you submit that in. Tutorials, I won't say anything about them now other than they happen every week on a Wednesday. There's 6 of them. You have your own TA, you'll have your own tutorial link. That will happen. I will talk about it on Wednesday, and at 11, when our class is done, you'll leave this Zoom and then you'll join the Zoom for your tutorial. And that will be your TA for the semester. The person who's working with you on the tutorial, on the assignment, also the person who's assessing the rest of your work for the semester. So that's the person you want to connect with. It's going to be smaller groups than this lecture, and on purpose. Slides. I got 2 minutes, so that's good. I wanted a bit more. I wanted the chance to kind of take questions. I'm going to have to punt questions to sort of 11 here, but that's okay. You're going to get a partial set before and a full set after. So yes, there's recordings after, but I do know students like to have some slides in hand because they like to be able to annotate slides. And also maybe even having the recording, it's not quite the same, right? To be able to have the slides and be able to study them and have them as a thing in your hand. I will share them. I share a partial set before and a full set after. It's not because I'm being capricious or sort of arbitrary, but it's because it's anchored into what's called a SOLO literature, the scholarship of teaching and learning. Having them ahead of time, having let's say half ahead of time, the ones that have more content heavy with sort of definitions and graphs. It does allow students to look at it and say, okay, this is where the lecture is going, to pre-form some ideas about what the narrative of the lecture is. It helps with retention. It helps with actually paying attention. But when all the slides are there ahead, then surprise and sort of novelty and moments from the lectures are gone. And I'm not saying for all of you, but research tells us for a number of people. And then the engagement in the lessoning actually goes down. And so I've been using the same partial before, full after, I don't know, 15 years now. I continue to think that while it's not perfect, it's better than the alternative. So every morning before class, you'll be able to pick up the partial set of PowerPoints, but trust and know that every slide I use will be available after class. And so you don't need to be writing every word down that's on the slides. You want to be taking your notes, active reading, active listening. You want to be taking your notes on things that are not on the actual slides. That's what we'll be doing. So partial set before, recording, and full set after. That will be the model for the whole semester. So what do we have going into next class? I know I'm at 11 right on the dot here. Some people have to run. Actually, you don't have to run. This class is scheduled from 9 to 12. But nonetheless, try to be disciplined. For next class, we have culture on Wednesday. The first tutorial is at 11. So following class on Wednesday. The first lecture reflection is due Wednesday morning. You don't have to do it, but then that becomes one of the 12 you're not doing. That's fine, but I encourage you to do it. And of course, you can start making peer contributions on Quarkus. I did see a few of you posting on the week 1 discussion board. I haven't read those yet. So I hope to see you again. If I don't, then obviously it's all fine. I'm going to stick around and take questions for as long as there's students here, but otherwise, I hope to see you on Wednesday. So thank you for your attention. Cheers. Have a good day. If any of you are sticking around to have a chat, just wait for a minute or two, and then I can call on you, absolutely. And then you can unmic, you can unmute, or you can put your question in the chat, whichever you feel more comfortable with. Questions by chat, by DM, or by voice. I'm happy with all of it. Just so we're 100% like transparency and disclosure here, I'm continuing to record because yeah, if there's any questions and clarification that might be helpful to students, that will be sort of part of it. If you have something more personal you'd want to chat with me on, let's just wait. So the way we'll do it is that we'll do public stuff first, and then if there's something private you want to talk to me about, then we'll wait until it's just there's no one left or very few people left, and then I will turn off the recording. Okay, maybe we can have our first question from Zilin.
Hi, Professor. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi. Yeah, so I just want a little bit of clarification for the peer contributions evaluation portion of the class. So in the syllabus, it said there was two distinct ways that we can get points for it. So the first one was to answer general questions for the course form, which would be 0.5% per answer. And then afterwards, it said the second way we can contribute is by posting course content material, insights, further understanding, etc., on like other forums related to culture, mass media, work, and health. But there was also a specific length for the second one, I think, where it said you needed to make sure that your contribution or your post for the other forms were no less than 100 words in length, and will be credited 0.5% towards the component. Is that also pertaining to the answers when we're responding to our classmates in terms of the course content forum, or is that only specific to forums outside of the course content forum?
Yeah, it's that's a really good start. It's a great first question. Yes, the word count is only for the what I call the substantive post.
Mhm.
It's the post on the content. The idea there is it's a kind of a discussion. So whether or not somebody is talking about what happened in another course of theirs or something they learned in their personal lives or something they saw in a media source. Some of those posts could be great and only 30 or 40 words, but we want to make sure that we've got clarity, and I don't want anybody not to get credit because the TA who reads it will say, well, this is too short, it's not long enough. So the 100 words end up being like a minimum. If you've got something you're contributing, a discussion, you're responding to someone because there's 4 or 5 students that are going back and forth on the concept from the lecture or from the text, you make your post 100 or more words, and then you're good to go. Answering students' questions, I don't normally do word count for that because the truth is it gets cluttered for no reason. If a student is asking for the link to the submission for the lecture reflections, and you provide that to them, I don't really need you to be typing 100 words. They needed something quite specific, and you gave it to them. So sometimes the answer to those questions are like 6 or 8 words. People may say like, "Oh, nice to meet you," or they may sign it. They may, but I don't want just fluff for the fluff's sake at that point. So it is not necessary. So answering question in the Q&A board, the general questions about the course, that doesn't have a word count, but all the other boards do. So if you can do a mix, you answer 3 colleagues' questions and you make 7, posts that are about content, or you can do all content, or you can do all answering colleagues' questions. That's up to you. But yes, the word count is only on the latter.
I guess like a slight follow-up that also relates to Aaliyah's question inside the chat is
Yeah,
so the expectation for the course during the semester is basically that we are expected to make a minimum of 10 posts in total in order to get the full 5%, right?
that's correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
beautiful. Thank you very
And
much.
it's a credit, no credit, it's a credit, no credit,
Mhm.
with no downside. So what do I mean by that? If you make 10 posts and one or two was not credited, not because of a mistake, but because it didn't rise to the level of what's been articulated in the syllabi, you don't get 4 out of 5, you got 4 out of 4, and then you get to make 2 more and get your 5 out of 5. So it's not 10 opportunities. It's your grade reflects how many credited posts you've made. I'm not saying this is what should happen, but historically, it takes a handful of students, let's say out of a class of 260, maybe it's 12. It takes a couple of students a little longer because they keep not following the instructions. And so maybe it took them 15 or 16 posts to get to 10 credited posts, because they keep doing things that are not enough. So there's no cost. If somehow you're short, you just do another one. And then you get your full grades.
Okay. Thank you very much. Have a
Good
great day.
stuff. Thank you. I'm gonna go back here, the chat. I saw Mina was wondering where we submit lecture reflections and just answer into a Google Doc and submit that PDF. Yes, the assignment box, Dropbox, I think will be open this afternoon. If it's not open already, you will see it. It will pretty easy to find, and then there's going to be an announcement that says it's released, and there's going to be a link. So you'll be able to click on the link. You'll be able to find it because the directions will be quite clear. But you'll be uploading it, whether you use Google Doc or Microsoft or whatever other word processor, Notepad or anything, that's fine. As long as it's a document, you put lecture reflection 1 and then you write your blurb. And then you submit that. And then when you do your second one, you go back to the same file and then you just add your second reflections to that file. Then you upload that one. And then the third and the fourth. So your 5th reflection will have your 5 reflections in it. And your 10th reflection, because you need to do 10, will have all 10 reflections in it. Whether you submit a PDF or a doc or an RTF, I didn't want to put, because I love Apple product. I have an Apple tablet, but sometimes students use the Apple extension file, which some of the TAs can't open. And so anything that's universal, that's more universal. I think Google Doc may also be doing ODT. I think that one would also work, but like, PDF is safe, Doc is safe, RTF is a rich text file that's safe. Ilya is asking, I have related question. Is there a number of peer contributions? Yes, 10 for full grades. Catherine's asking, I'm still confused about the directionality of agency and structure. Structure has an impact on it, but how does agency impact structure? Clarify another example. Yes. So you could think the best examples or the most clear examples are probably any time a group of people get together and advocate for a change. So a group of students that doesn't like a particular policy that their teacher has, and they approach the teacher and says like, listen, I know this is the policy, but here's why it's a problem for us. Is there any way you consider making a change to it? And then they change it. That would be agency changing structure. On a more macro level, social movements, organizations, NGOs, activists fighting for a change in the law or a change in policy. That would be another example of the structure changing. So there's a law that's on the books, or maybe there's no law that's on the books. And then they're advocating for a new law to be put on the books to protect people that they're not currently being protected, or that for things to be done in a different way than it was, or they're asking for resources to be distributed in a different way. So this is a really topical example.